Hey, it's the Time Enough podcast where we look at episodes of The Twilight Zone and beyond. This is Matt here. With me today is Mark Palmer from the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. Hello, Mark.
Hello, how are you? Thanks for having me back.
I guess I'll throw your question back at you and see if your family thinks you're in the Twilight Zone. They think you're crazy. They think you're in the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, I would say so, judging by the reactions or the interest from Thanksgiving this year. N- Basically, a range of mildly disinterested to really superficially curious. So, that judging by that, they're just, I think, afraid to get into maybe some potentially racy or offensive conversations. And that's what they associate with conspiracy theory, unfortunately.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
don't
they
do
still think I'm crazy.
There we go. um, we don't do Thanksgiving in the Twilight Zone. We probably have Thanksgiving in the Twilight Zone. Japan doesn't do it. I work on Thanksgiving. I work on Christmas. Yeah, it's kind of New Year's. It's the big thing here, but people, I guess, sit around respectfully, don't trade their opinions in Japan. That's just, I guess, how people tend to roll sometimes. But interestingly, people never hug. I don't hug family, but I'm like, I'm not a hugger anyway, so it kind of works for me.
I hear that. Yeah, I'm very tall, so I've had many awkward hugs in my life, but I enjoy them. Recently, not too recently, but once I hugged someone who pointed out that usually people hug, just like ordinarily with their like right arms oriented, and he told me to use your left arm, meaning your left side touches their left side, and that's supposed to be like a heart to heart hug. So I do think there's some really spiritual qualities to something like that with a loved one, connecting with them in their heart center.
Yeah, that's true. I'm wondering. I'm left-handed. If I do go in for a hug, do I go in that way? Huh.
Maybe.
um, Getting into today's subject matter, it is an episode called "Perchance to Dream." Nice poetic title. I guess it's Shakespeare, whatever. Uh, but I'm going to quickly run through some of the trivia on this one just for a moment, if you'll indulge me. This is the first episode that was not written by Rod Serling. He wrote like 75% of these things, but there's a few he didn't. This is Charles Beaumont who gets the credit for that, and he would write several pretty iconic episodes of this series. The director Robert Florey was born in Paris and immigrated to the US at age 21 in 1921. An A-list B-movie director. Okay, sure. He held many features for multiple studios, including the Marx Brothers debut film The Coconuts, as well as the German expressionist influenced Murders in the Rue Morgue. He'll direct two more episodes of The Twilight Zone. Richard Conte plays our dream troubled Edward Haw. He started out as a character actor, but ended up starring in many B features, especially those in the crime genre. John Larch is Dr. Elliot Rathman. In the 1950s, he often found himself in westerns, but later on nabbed credits, including two more appearances on The Twilight Zone, as well as iconic shows like Mission Impossible and Hawaii Five-0. We should not forget that he also played the police chief in the first two Dirty Harry films. Suzanne Lloyd truly is Maya, but this is her only visit to the Twilight Zone. She did rack up a notable number of appearances in other shows such as Gunsmoke, Bonanza, Have Gun Will Travel, and The Avengers. Okay, I got to the end of that list. Um, so, Mark, I'm going to have you kind of get us in by reading the prologue. You can, some people do the Rod Serling impression. Some people do like Southern Mad Men or, Goofy. So, however you want to run it is fine.
It's funny you asked me that because I did notice because I have the DVD set of all of the seasons, and they do like these little, at the end of the episode, Rod will come on and preview the next episode. And he has this way of moving his mouth that I noticed was interesting. He kind of like pulls his lips close to his teeth, I notice when he says certain words. So I just naturally tried to like mimic it. So here we go. I'll butcher it.
All right.
12 o'clock noon, an ordinary scene, an ordinary city. Lunchtime for thousands of ordinary people. To most of them, this hour will be a rest, a pleasant break in a day's routine. To most, but not all, to Edward Hall, time is an enemy, and the hour to come is a matter of life and death.
That works for me. You do a lot of book readings anyway. You're into this, right? um, so actually, the directors that would do Rod's segments would get annoyed because he would talk through one side of his mouth, through his teeth, and the cigarette that he never smokes is just because he heard, you're less nervous if you're holding something while you act.
So he's not actually even smoking. He's just holding it as a prop.
Exactly. I mean, he did smoke plenty, I believe, but he wasn't smoking while doing his narration. It was just there to help him be a little less nervous.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I do the same thing.
Yeah. I've been on before. It's the Arrowwood site. You go and you start reading people's insane Datcherous stories, right?
Oh.
And
Yeah.
the thing you find in there is that a lot of these people, they keep smoking like fake cigarettes. Like that seems to be like endemic to like the to Datra or something about that particular spirit makes you want to smoke fake cigarettes, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Very interesting. I wouldn't doubt it. I've heard some weird things about that plant in particular.
Well, like the thing is, you have teenagers just picking it off the street and ending up in the hospital or jail, right? But I've heard there were certain tribes that would just, as the coming of age ceremony, they'd give you a handful and send you out into the wilderness and see what happens.
Yeah, no, there's definitely ritual use of it for sure. I don't know all the details, but it definitely belongs in the Twilight Zone. If Rod had come across Michael Harner's book or something, The Way of the Shaman, back then, he might have wrote it into a script. But yeah, there's not much mention of drugs in the Twilight Zone. I mean, I haven't seen every episode, but not many come to mind for like a episode surrounding drug use. Am I wrong there?
I think you're right, because I think there needs to be like a level of and I'm not going to say quite sanity, but I guess more level headedness. A person like entering the Twilight Zone sort of needs to like realize something's wrong and not just be tripping out, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
So,
That would be too much of an easy like explanation for all things weird. It's like not a very smart plot device, basically.
one of my favorite movies is Roger Corman's The Trip, which it has a bit of a Twilight Zone vibe to it. That's a Peter Fonda, Dennis Hopper. It's yeah, if you do want to get conspiratorial, it's got like the whole crew there, but it's a fun movie to watch. But
Right on.
that one, it has this sort of thing, but it's Peter Fonda actually hallucinating and things. So you're like, of course, that's not like a Twilight Zone thing. That's Peter Fonda tripping, who probably was on the set when you get right down to it. But our people in the Twilight Zone are a lot more, I guess, straight laced. So
That's the impression I got for sure. It seemed like there are characters in the show itself that, and I watched a couple episodes this week, not just Perchance to Dream, but there were a couple episodes who had the appearance of like a sort of someone who saw something, I guess you could say, and like they would hint at like the other world in their mind, but no explicit like, well, he smoked this or he drank that, or that was never a part of it.
like it's kind of like the, I guess, first subversion of the stereotype 50s sort of stuff. You got the guy. I mean, they are drinking like plenty of scotch and stuff in these, but I did an episode Judgment Night, which I guess airs after this, but the guy he knows that this boat's going to get sunk every night. He has to relive it because he sunk the boat basically. But his solution is like, well, at 2:15 I know something's going to happen, so I'm going to just go to the bar and get smashed, which honestly seems like a rational thing to do if you're on a doomed ship. So
right. And there was one episode that I watched that took place for most of the episode in a bar. This episode we're talking about kind of took place in this guy's mind, but you get the idea of like a nightlife and like the dangers of like going out and with this dream he had. But I don't want to give anything away too soon.
yeah, honestly, you can spoil wherever you want.
Okay.
I think I think people coming in have probably seen it at some point, and maybe
Cool.
watched it before listening to this. I don't know. Um, Something that kind of struck me is it seemed like kind of an early version of Nightmare on Elm Street, with Maya being our Freddy, because he's
Interesting.
the whole thing. I did a podcast on Nightmare on Elm Street a few months ago where he had read a
Yeah.
story from somewhere in Southeast Asia, I think, or Southeast. I think it was like Laotian immigrants or something. Anyway, the point is, like, the son had this thing where he thought if he fell asleep he would die, which actually turned out to happen. But when they went to his room, cleaning up his stuff, they found he had stowed away a coffee machine, like hidden a coffee machine in his room, which you also see in Nightmare on Elm Street. So but the idea your dreams are out to kill you and there's an entity in the dreams out to kill you, I think this seems like a nice earlier iteration of that.
Right. Yeah, I had not heard that, but I also don't really watch a lot of horror movies, so I've never seen the Nightmare on Elm Street, but the concept of like a dream entity is something that's definitely strange, and it was a little unsettling in this, you know, show because like you said with this Laotian person, this guy dies at the end of the episode. In his dream he jumps out a window, but in reality the psychiatrist is sitting there and watches him go to sleep and then realizes that he isn't waking up, and he's got no heart rate, right? And that roll credits, but it's definitely interesting. The bigger theme I picked up on is like this authority of like he was told by the doctor that he had a heart condition, and then you see that manifest in his dreams as a nightmare. And you even see this like character Maya, like, I mean, I don't mean to like go against what you're saying, but it really was kind of comical. Like, that wasn't a nightmare to me. Like she took him to like an amusement park, and then he was like, oh no, the excitement, I'm gonna die from the excitement. And like, it just sounds so silly now with our modern context, but I'm sure it maybe had a more serious context back then, especially maybe because amusement parks were probably taken a little more seriously. I mean, I'm sure you've seen that. What is it, Danger Park or whatever that is on Netflix or YouTube? It's like all about the about this one amusement park that has all these lawsuits or whatever because of people that have actually gotten hurt. So there's a reason to fear amusement parks. But this guy, he really had, like, in my opinion, um, what seemed like a almost like a placebo effect going on, where the doctor had given him this like this prescription of like, your heart is such and such, so you can't do this and that, and then that manifested in this extreme anxiety, which then bled into his dreams, right? And then he's going, and all these exciting things are happening to him in this dream, and he recognizes like, oh no, this isn't going to be good for me. And in like a siren kind of way, Maya, which, the word Maya in some circles also means illusion. Um, Maya comes and kind of beckons him to get on this roller coaster ride, and I kind of see that as like the roller coaster or the rat race of life, right? And she's like the sexual passion or lust, like pulling him into the material realm on a really, really meta level. But then on that sort of less meta level, it seemed like a placebo induced hypochondria to excitement. Like he was just such a nervous wreck because of what this doctor told him would happen to him. Meanwhile, he's smoking cigarettes and I'm sure drinking scotch, because it seems like alcohol is very prevalent in a lot of shows in that era, not just the Twilight Zone. But yeah, it just it rang true for the era we're in now without getting into all the politics. But it's just like this idea that someone else is an authority over your health and can tell you what's right or wrong for your health, and that could cause a tremendous amount of worry in a lot of people. I mean, I see it in my own family members as part of why they think I'm crazy, because I'm always like, well, you really, why do you trust your doctor? It's not that I don't think they should, but I just want them to question it, and that was a theme in this episode where, the doctor said, like, pretty much condemned him to that state. Honestly, I mean, I don't, would he have died if he didn't put all that mental pressure on himself? It's just a TV show, so I know, it's not that thorough of a thought experiment, but I think that's what they were kind of hinting at.
I got a friend, he's from Australia, and he talks about the idea of in Aboriginal societies, the pointing the bone, sort of the shaman or whatever. I don't know if shaman's quite the right word in this case, but like they point the bone at someone, and that like signifies like impending death or whatever. So when you're part of that society, yes, that you in your mind, oh, in 6 weeks I'm gonna die, right? Like we might get a diagnosis about that, like you're gonna die of this or that within 6 weeks, and then you've basically had the bone pointing at you, bone pointed at you. Like to alliterate my words sometimes.
I never,
Transliterate.
I never heard that rite or ritual before. The bone. That's interesting. The bone pointing.
What's like a curse thing? I mean, you could take other
Yeah.
societies where it might, like
Yeah. It's like a hex.
right, exactly. So the thing is, if you're not part of that society, then the hex doesn't really have power over you, because you would just be like, why are you pointing a bone at me?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, the doctor's authority does have a power in like that kind of mindset, especially in the 50s when all this medicine was billed as like new, revolutionary, we're in the future, and they have all these things like fluoride and lithium and, crazy stuff going into our bodies. Not that any of those things in and of themselves are bad in the right dosages, or, maybe we shouldn't have them at all. Again, maybe that's a separate podcast, but it was a time when, chemicals became mainstream in a different way, in an industrialized way. We saw that happen in the 1950s. So the Twilight Zone is kind of a time capsule for that era. I wish the commercials were still on all of the episodes. There's only a couple. I noticed like season 2 and 3 in this box set that I have. They did something wrong with the cutting, and some of the commercials made their way into the show. I, I'm forgetting which season this is, but either way, and it's so cool to see that because it's like, again, it's like a time capsule to what people were buying and putting in their homes back then. There's a lot of toxic stuff, and yeah, with that being said, I'm sure there was plenty of things that led to people dropping dead in those days, and a lot of it kind of in my mind is self-induced, with this kind of mental severity that we place on our health, and giving that power over to an authority to determine whether or not we're healthy.
Yeah. Where was I heading with that? Yeah, I think I don't know if it was in this episode because he went to sleep too fast, I think, but there are a lot of these episodes where the doctors are just like handing out cigarettes, here, this will make you feel better. I mean, this is when those commercials you're talking about would have, like 8 out of 10 doctors suggest you smoke Chesterfields or something, right? I mean,
Well,
that
and it
sounds
was
insane
almost,
now.
now that I think about it, it was almost like an Inception kind of thing too, where he woke up in a dream and then he was in that office again. You know what I mean? Like the dream was within a dream almost. And then when it's only when you kill him, when he like jumps out the window, that you realize like that he didn't kill himself. He just died in his dream. But I found that kind of interesting. It was almost like what we would call an inception now, thanks to that movie. But the concept has existed in sci-fi. The potential of something happening in your dream that can cause an actual death. And I think that's not by accident. That's not just a work of fiction. That's very much inspired by like some shamanic and occult stuff. I mean, one thing that I learned about when listening, I think it was the Mysterious Universe podcast, but they were talking about Carlos Castaneda, and some of the stuff that Castaneda was participating in when he was like sort of more of a cult leader. And they talked about going out of their body and manifesting in someone else's dreams in order to, have control over their being somehow. And I think I've even heard similar stories associated with is it Marilyn Manson, right? The pop singer guy who recently got in some trouble with I don't want to call him a pop singer. I guess he's more of a heavy metal guy, or at least he used to be. But yeah, he got in some trouble for like domestic abuse, but I think there is a reality to that there's possibly some sort of, based on this story that I heard, I think the guy's name was Gary Wayne, and it's a different Gary Wayne. I'm not sure if it's the same Gary Wayne that recently I booked on Tinfoil Hat. It's a different guy. I got to go back. I'll send you, maybe we'll correct this and I'll give you a link in the episode description when I go back and look it up. But either way, they had this really interesting story about this guy who had to save a woman who was within the like psychological reach of Marilyn Manson, and he kept appearing in her dreams and kind of haunting her basically, and trying to control her life and get her to come back to where she was when she lived with them. So I definitely don't think that the show Twilight Zone is crafting all of these ideas. I think they do a really, really elegant job of framing these concepts into the 1950s life's scope at the time, and it would be, for people who maybe are listening to this show somehow and haven't seen the Twilight Zone before, it's kind of like what Black Mirror is doing now. Black Mirror is kind of taking that role of like a really compelling show like the Twilight Zone was, like a thought-provoking kind of, and I've never, that's never appealed to me for some reason, for whatever reason. Like I watched Black Mirror and I was like, yeah, no, the Twilight Zone's better. So I'm happy to be here looking into this, as to the best of my ability. But yeah, and the guy also, the actor looked like Robert De Niro. That's another thing that I noticed. He kind of had like a Robert De Niro kind of look-alike vibe going.
I was just thinking, oh, for age 30, because they call him age 35. I'm like, he's not looking so well. He has a heart condition, I guess, but he's not looking so good for age 35.
The ages in these shows too is weird. Like a lot of times they'll say like a guy is like 18 or 19 or 25 and he looks like he's like 50, or like that, in the reverse where they look a little younger, a little older. But the I think it's the episode after that. I don't know if you covered this one already, but it's the one called What You Need, right?
Oh, I've recently watched it, but I have not done my episode for that yet.
That one had a similar looking character, much more malevolent, but yeah, and it just strikes me as like an archetype in this time, the kind of like dark eyebrowed, like brooding, almost balding man character, like this guy who's like on the brink of a revelation or like on the brink of collapse in his life, like this kind of midlife crisis archetype that they kind of play on. And it takes a whole different spin in that episode. But yeah, definitely the Twilight Zone brings a lot of concepts to mind. I don't think it's by any means dated. I think people in this era can watch it and find a lot of parallels, like the whole health thing going on. This episode touches on that a little bit.
I do want to get more into the dreams. I was thinking about the Inception stuff, and
Mm.
I had a interesting dream a few weeks ago actually, where it was two layers, and the first layer was not lucid at all. I was like at some kind of a it was like next to an airport or next to a beach in a resort, and I was like going to sleep in there. And then the second layer was lucid. I was like playing like with those, creating things, changing things, and then coming out to the first layer. But it was weird. Second layer was lucid, but the first one wasn't. And I just remember at one point coming out into that first layer and someone just being like, "Oh, we've basically given up on you now," because I kept going back into that second dream layer.
Really?
The other highly entertaining Inception style one was a few years ago during the August holiday here, where I woke up, went to the tea room. This is like an old style Japanese house. Started to have breakfast, and then woke up again in my in the bed. Went to the tea room, started to have breakfast, and then woke up again. It happened like 2 or 3 times. It was completely insane. I think my body
Really?
was basically just saying, "Get some more sleep. Don't get up yet."
Yeah. That's strange because for me, like it's hard for me to relate to that sort of concept in a dream because I always have like dreams that feel like I'm not anywhere near anything familiar to me. Like it's very rare that I'll have a dream where I'm in like a place that I know in my waking normal life. And even people, like it's always usually just strange looking people that I cannot remember their faces for the life of me, but I'll have like as I'm waking up, like kind of memories of like whole plots that took place in my dream and just with these characters that have no identities. And so hearing that from you, I'm like, oh wow, I'm a little jealous because I'm like, I wonder if I've ever dreamt of like my house or where I live now and just don't remember it because yeah, it's very rare. I'll have like moments where I'll have like that falling sensation, and that'll kind of snap me into a lucid dream. But that is very like fleeting and doesn't like I usually become aware that I'm looking at the room I'm in and it's not, like the one or two times that that's happened, I'll look at the room and then I'll be like, oh, I'm dreaming. And then I'm out of it. Then I'm awake, and that's like that falling sensation. It's somehow associated with that. So the fact that he jumps out of a window and then you realize that the dream is done and you're back in like the actual therapy room as far as like, the fourth wall goes. It was kind of like I thought that was another nod to it. And then Inception plays on that too with like the leaning back in the chair, right? They have to like get people to like have that sensation of falling to kick them into that other dream.
Right, right. So yeah, I guess I don't have the falling feel so much. I do occasionally, in the morning I'll check the time or something, or even check the weather and realize that's not the real phone or that's not the real clock.
Yeah.
you know.
See, that even fascinates me too, like a phone interaction in a dream. And I wonder if it's just like it could be. I mean, I think this is even like backed up by certain psychological studies on dreams that like different cultures like experience dreams differently. So just the fact that you're like in Japan could have a totally different effect on your dreams just because of the architecture and like the layout and like subtle things about the place you're in that are different to like maybe a place like America, which has a little more. I mean, I've never been to Japan, so I can't do a direct visual comparison, but I would assume things are a little more ornate and beautiful there, and that might add to a richer dreamscape.
It depends on what direction you're looking, because there's lots of power lines. For example, they don't bury any of the power lines. Like your nice view of the mountains invariably has a power line somewhere in it. Of course, everything's
Okay.
much more close, but yeah, I mean, there's not like litter on the streets. I'm from Atlanta. You can at least, yeah, you can find some parts of Atlanta that are not particularly nice looking. Some of my
Yeah.
dreams, of course, I end up back in the old neighborhood, right? So, um, I had a highly, I was just walking down the street once. It wasn't lucid, and then like a snake jumped into my face. So, which that must have its own meaning of some kind. Snakes and dreams are usually
I
noteworthy.
Yeah, I can say that some of my most memorable kind of wake ups, that falling sensation happened after like seeing a snake or like a crocodile in a dream. I'm looking back now on my Patreon because you are kindly one of our patrons, and I gave you a spirit animal name, and I'm like, was it something to do with
I
snake? No,
no, I saw that. It was the luminous moth.
no, no, the humorous moth.
Oh, okay. I must have seen the L as a H. Humorous is good too, though. But
Yes, right on.
yeah, I did catch that. So
Well,
you
I
got the
think I think the cat lady theme comes up, in this show or in this episode with Maya. This kind of like it's more than just a femininity. It's like a wild, almost animalistic, like lower consciousness, feminine energy. And I found that kind of interesting because, like we just touched on, animals are very powerful dream symbols, you know. So the fact that she appears in this kind of like cat outfit, and then I think she's out of the outfit when she comes and meets him, like when he runs away. Like I don't know if she's dressed the same the whole time, but
I
either
think
way, it's
she changes out.
right.
Yeah, she shows up looking very catty, and it gets a little less so, I believe, once we're rolling around the amusement park.
Yeah, yeah, and then they're on like the roller coaster, which, you know, with amusement parks in mind, it's interesting because I think Walter Bosley put this in his book about Disney, that it's possible that the Ferris wheel in certain amusement parks, like the original Disney World, is it Disney World or Land? That's the first one. I don't remember, but either way, they sorry.
Oh, Land is the first one.
Thank you. So Disneyland had like this carousel that would, or not a carousel, I'm sorry, a Ferris wheel. And apparently, according to some theorists, and Walter Bosley is one of them, the Ferris wheel is some kind of energy conductor if it's placed in a correct alignment with certain earth energies. So just the amusement park itself is also kind of a significant uh, not setting, but you know, even like energetically a setting, like in a dream, or even as a, you know, I don't know if Rod Sterling had all that info. You know, it might have just been, like I said before, like a kind of like an exciting place to run into someone like that in those times. But it's interesting how, with all this Tartaria talk that's been going on, I've definitely participated in it on my show. Amusement parks seem to be another like strange place for many different reasons, not just you know, the typical carnies and oddities that would come along with that kind of thing.
We were I was talking about world fairs a few weeks ago with a guest, and we were coming from like kind of the Star Trek perspective, right? So we were like, you know, just talking about what's predicted in the past, what's now. But getting back to the 1893, that is the first Ferris wheel, the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, which you know, that's the one. If you want to play with the Tataria ideas, that's a good one. You could also just say they broke a whole lot of labor laws. So I don't know. But yeah, it is interesting because they had in the back of that 93 World's Fair, like the first large Ferris wheel. So built by the dude whose name was Ferris, or engineered, right, or whatever. So that's kind of interesting, I guess, to look into deeper. I've been to a dream amusement park or two in my past. Most memorable, I think there actually is a Tron roller coaster now, but I rode an insane Tron roller coaster in my dream, you know. So no, I just had fun with that one, because maybe because I don't have a heart condition. Although my most standout memory is finishing the ride and then sitting on a park bench outside. That is a weird thing that occurs. I keep ending up in a, you know, park benches and, like, you know, well manicured lawns for some reason in my dreams. So I guess
Very
it's
interesting.
better than the fires of hell or something. So dream entities. I've met a few, what probably like what you might say higher vibrational ones that actually seem to teach and things. So I had one show up a few times, and then I actually say, okay, I'm going now after several dreams. And the first lesson, like really pushing the idea of intention and focus, like before I'd read anything, but you start reading books and they keep saying that over and over again anyway. So, you know, I learned it in a dream, then I read about it. So that was pretty trippy. And some of the lower entity ones, you know, I have had nightmares where I just kind of like, hey, there's something here like trying to mess with me. And a few times I'll realize it's a dream, wake up, and then go back into the dream to go deal with it. I'm like, no, I'm not gonna just let that be. I can wrap up the situation.
Jeez, you got a lot going on, man. You got to start recording this somehow.
I am recording this. We're recording now. No, I do keep a log, you know.
Yeah, I was gonna ask
sporadically.
if that because that seems to be a helpful tool to visualize and remember your dreams better.
Yeah, that's why I have like such good recall on some of these ones I'm bringing up. If I hadn't written them down, I probably would not be able to recall them. So, um,
Right.
and for anyone that's getting, I'm a slacker. I think the last time I made a full entry was like 6 months ago. I've had several dreams and just you know, I did put a little notebook next to my bed. So I found just writing 3 words or something. You wake up and you can't be bothered with sitting there and writing 5 paragraphs, but if you just write a couple words, that will usually open the door for a full recall later if you need it. Like you can come back like actually I think I can do this in real time. And I think I just wrote 4 words for a dream about a week ago. Let's see what I can make out of this. I wrote new mall, jester sign, classroom with annoying teacher and a low gate. Okay, yes, I remember. I was in a town and it was like kind of like middle-aged looking streets, but more technically advanced, right? And I ended up in a classroom and there's like big wooden gate and there was a teacher there and we were trying to get through the gate. So that I'm a teacher, so I don't know what that means, but and eventually this is because I had just seen the Dune movie. So it was like right after the new Dune came out, but yeah, like someone like threw like a sleeper gas bomb, right? So, I just wrote
No.
4 words, but I just got like all of that just from the couple words I wrote. So, for
Well, on the note of like throwing the sleeper gas bomb, because like this brings to mind like dreams I would have, because I used to be, I don't want to say I was a bad kid, but I definitely was like a rough kid in the sense that like me and my friends would do like, BB gun fights and like firework fights and like all kinds of stuff that's not recommended by me for any kids to do. But I remember like after I kind of got out of that more like unorganized sort of violent expression and started doing martial arts, I would have these dreams where I would be in these situations like the ones with the BB guns and the fireworks, but then like it would be like a fight and the fight would come and for whatever reason, and I think this is like a common thing like professional fighters talk about is like you have like rubber arms, and like in your dreams I always thought of it as like, well, obviously there's no like physical feeling because when you're studying martial arts, you get used to what a punch feels like, in your mind, you have a sort of kinesthetic memory of what it feels like. So when you punch in a dream and you don't feel that body response that you're used to feeling, it like alters your dream so that you're losing the fight, right? And that would happen to me all the time. And I realized like, because I told that to somebody, and the reason I bring up the professional fighter thing is because this teacher, not my Sifu, but like a more advanced sort of peer student, he was like, yeah, a lot of professional champion fighters talk about having dreams where they lose the fight before a big fight. It's like a nervous kind of thing. Maybe that's why, it wasn't a problem. I was just bringing it up because it was something to talk about, but that was his explanation for it. But I always thought of it as like, well, maybe, because it's a dream, there's no, that physical response isn't there. And then my mind, however, it is in that space, feels the lack of that sensation and then interprets it as like, oh, you didn't even hurt the person that you just hit, like that punch sucked, like, and then your hand like goes ooh, like into rubber or something, and you're like, oh, I'm dreaming.
yeah, hand check is one of the tips for finding your lucid dreams. I got dragged
Mm,
back into, not, I shouldn't say dragged because I love playing the cello, but I hadn't played a cello for 11 years. And then the local orchestra dragged me back in. So the
okay.
day before the first rehearsal, I just had a dream. It was like in a blue, misty space, kind of like a color Twilight Zone sort of vibe. And I was just practicing, It was the one I had loaned to me 11 years before, which had like a buzzy string. So I was like, okay, I got to compensate for the fact that there's this buzz. I'm like working on the dream. Now, fortunately, I went to the practice the next day, and the one they are loaning me now is fantastic. It has no problems. So,
Mm.
but I
Well, and that's something to be mentioned because when we take on these skills, our dreams are kind of informing where we can go with it. I think when you're really tapped into something like playing the cello and have a relationship with it on that kinesthetic level, you do tend to dream about it. I remember when I made a lot of like these wire wrap jewelry pieces that I have right here, like crystals and whatnot. Sometimes I would have like weird dreams where, certain wire shapes would just be like in my dream. I would like see the pattern, of what I might do next. And that was like, oh, okay, I'm connecting with that. I haven't had any podcast related dreams, so maybe I need to level up and we'll see. But actually, now that I say that though, it is weird. Somebody hit me up on Instagram, a buddy who's also a patron, actually. Shout out to him. I forget his spirit animal name off the top of my head, but he reached out to me. He was like, hey, man, the weirdest thing happened. I had a dream about you and you're in my dream. And, I woke up, I told my wife, like, Mark was in my dream. And then she like said something weird and he realized that he was still dreaming and like I was still there. Like, and I'm like, you had like, I was in your dream. Like, okay, this guy's listening to my podcast a lot, which I encourage that. Thank you for listening to the podcast. But I wonder, like, if there's something to that, like you listen to something enough and it really just like seeps into your subconscious somehow.
Yeah, I have excitedly told people about my other layer dreams in dreams, and then I'm like, and then I forget it when I wake up. I was like, oh, I'll remember I told it to someone in the dream. Oops. And on full disclosure, sometimes I wake up like mentally playing like match 3 games in my head too. So it's not always like um spiritually advanced or anything. It's because then you're like, oh man, I was playing too many video games the day before.
I see.
That certainly happens. But yeah, I guess the thing you do a lot shows up in there. And just to dovetail back to this episode, this guy worries so much. That's all his dreams can be, worries. The thing that kind of depresses me here, and I guess is sort of what Rod Serling's getting at. Well, his is more about the whack situation, I suppose. But the whole point that this guy is probably in a good position to actually take hold of his dreams, and actually, if he learned to control them, then he would be quite a detailed, experienced dreamer. So he's getting an opportunity, and it's but it ends up killing him.
Yeah, no, he definitely has like this sense of like, you're almost confused when the show or the episode starts because he seems to have like almost like an oracle quality to him. That's the impression I got when he's talking about like, I can't go to sleep. Like these things that I'm seeing, like, maybe this is just my bias and all the other things I'm researching, but I got the idea that he had some kind of like brilliant thing about him. I don't think they remembered what he did for work or anything like that. If they really, colored his character more than just what you saw in the dream, like, his background or whatever. But it definitely felt like he had that kind of dreamer quality, but a distressed dreamer, even in his even before they got into the dream sequence part of the episode.
But yeah, like I mentioned not too long ago, waking up from a nightmare and then going back and almost being like, man, I could just leave that behind. But I'm like, I think I want to resolve that. It was 6:30 in the morning, just the right time to do that. So I did. So,
Wow.
but just because you wake up with that feeling, because that what the feeling it gives you is more important, because a dream is mostly things you can't really comprehend, so your brain's just making a narrative out of it and trying to find imagery that fits to have it make sense to you. So
right,
there's all that going on. I want to throw out a few questions. I throw these out on every episode. Sometimes it's a little obvious, sometimes it's not quite as obvious, but the first question is who in this episode was in the Twilight Zone? I guess the easy answer would be Edward Hall, our main character. Of course, we have the psychiatrist as well, and we have the office lady who looks like Maya. So I guess they could be candidates. What do you think?
Right. No, I would say all three. And then there was that whole crowd of men that were also standing kind of in the periphery, the extras, if you will, that were kind of there in the dream. But yeah, there were only three characters in the whole thing, really, other than those extras. And I would say that by all extensive purposes, Edward and Maya were in the Twilight Zone. And the psychiatrist was like this like in between space where like he was like an anchor to what Edward thought was his waking life. And that was kind of like his like indication, oh, okay, I'm not dreaming anymore. And then he jumps out the window and we realize that he is dreaming, like that the therapist almost took him. Is it a therapist? Would he be more of like, I think they called him a psychiatrist in those days, right? Like a shrink would
That's
be
what
the
I said, but I still get the psychiatrist psychologist dynamic
right.
mixed up. So he might have been one or the other.
Well, even that chair was odd. Like it was like a pill shaped leather like flat sofa that he laid on. It almost seemed like it was meant for someone to die on in a way, it just fit his body too perfectly. But either way, it was yeah, it was definitely Edward and Maya who I would answer were in the Twilight Zone for sure.
I guess I'd call Maya of the Twilight Zone. If the Twilight
Mm,
Zone is an illusion, then you can make even make that line a little stronger, I guess.
mm.
Um, the next question is: did Edward deserve his trip into the Twilight Zone? Of course, this one kills him, so
Yeah,
maybe
no.
nobody deserves that. So
I don't think we know enough background information on him. Like for all we know, he could be like a dismissed like cult leader who did a bunch of crazy stuff. Like we don't know his character background. I'm only saying that because I just listened to an episode of Tinfoil Hat about a cult leader. But yeah, it's like it, it it could be anything. I mean, I don't want to say anybody should die. No, absolutely not. But he definitely is a mysterious character. So we don't know like why we never really find out other than that, like, um, I'm calling it a prescription or diagnosis is the better term. Other than his diagnosis from his doctor, we don't really have a lot of like clues to go on as to what put him in this distressed state. He could be a veteran, he could be, working a hard job, like or he could have a rough family life or whatever it is. So that kind of, unless I'm forgetting something, I think that kind of puts me in the category of being like, I'm a little agnostic on on whether he deserved it or not.
yeah, and also when we meet him, he's been awake for like 72 hours or something, and no
Right.
one's gonna be that coherent at 72 hours of being awake. I got a friend back in university where he had the flu and the medicine apparently kept him up. The medicine they gave me like couldn't go to sleep, so he was awake for like 2 days.
Oh
Then
wow.
someone in the dorm comes in and puts on Event Horizon, and he's still terrified of Sam Neill, I believe.
I've
Sam
had
Neill, the doctor.
I've had a few nights like that turned into days, and you're up for 48 hours and you just feel like, there's a huge weight on your shoulders and you hit that bed and it's like the best relief ever. And then you wake up and you're like, what time is it? And it's like totally off hours from your normal wake up time. Yeah, definitely. Again, I don't recommend anybody using me as role model, but acid will do that to you.
Right. And that's a good segue into the next question, which is I like to place the episodes onto the tripometer, 0 being not trippy at all, 5 being extremely trippy. Decimal points are okay. I have one regular guest who likes to make up numbers, so
Okay.
I
Well,
think. Oh, go ahead.
I would give it a 3.3 just because it hit on some magic spots, so it deserves a 3. It was mild, but based on some of the other episodes I watched that were very close in number to that, in order of the season 1, I think, yes, it wasn't written by Rod Sterling. I haven't seen any of this Mr. Beaumont guy's other work, but I wouldn't put it on as one of my favorite episodes for sure. I mean, there was a couple better ones pretty
Hmm.
close to it. that I was like, oh, I should have picked that one instead, but I didn't know if you had already, worked it out with other people. So I'm like, well, you gotta, you get what you get type thing. So I definitely give it like a medium rating. And it was a thought-provoking episode. I think synchronistically, I always find a connection somehow for everything. I don't know if that says anything about my mindset, but I definitely saw some parallels with like just this whole thing with authority, medical authority in particular, given that it was a doctor who again diagnosed him to be, you know, uh I forget exactly what he said, but it seemed like that was what kept him up for that 72 hours. And then he's like, no, no, my doctor said I can't have too much excitement, and he's like getting all upset about that. So yeah, 3.3 out of 5.
I'll go a little bit higher to 3.7 simply because I'm a theme. I in the past I was a complete theme park obsessive, like researching information about theme parks, right? So just having that nice trippy theme park, I think, bumps it up just a touch for me.
Okay.
As we're winding down this one, I'm kind of curious which episodes around this really lit your fire.
Well, I like the one about the X-22 pilots who disappeared one by one, and they're all kind of like realizing it in an unsettling way. You know,
Okay.
the guy Harry or Ed Harrington, and then I forget the second guy who disappears, but then the last guy disappears, and you see the military officer come in, and he's like, oh look, the room's clear, we got room for 3 more patients in here. And it's like they were never there, and neither was the plane. It goes back to the hangar. But I think they called it the X2. I don't know if they called
Something
it
like that. I did watch that one about 2 weeks ago, and I'll be
yeah.
watching it actually in the next few evenings because I am recording that one for Monday. So
That one was cool with the, just because of the relation to like all the, military craft that's out there. And then the other one that I already mentioned, which I really liked, was the You Got What You Need, where it was kind of like, or What You Need was the title
yes,
of the
yes.
episode. The little old man, and he has like a box full of odd little trinkets and knickknacks and things, and he
What you
he
need.
lines up, yeah, he lines up this little synchronicity, and you don't see it right away, but then this guy catches on, and it doesn't end up good for him at the end. I'll just say that. But I thought it was interesting, like he hands him the scissors. You've seen this one, so you might know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
But he
yeah,
hands
yeah.
him the scissors in a way that I thought the old man was defending himself, but the guy interpreted it as like, oh, okay, this guy, the scissors are what I need. And he did end up needing the scissors. But it was interesting how the old man was like kind of saving his life when he could have killed him like multiple times. It seemed like there was multiple chances for that to happen.
So he was holding the handle and giving it like blade out, was it?
Yeah, well, he was holding the handle like on this side of his palm, so that like the blade out was like kind of like up towards his face and like
Oh, like a
against his
jab.
chest.
Ah,
Yeah,
okay.
almost like he was handing it to him, but it was like in between the two of them, like pointing towards the guy's face, right? And the older man was shorter, so it was kind of like reaching up towards him. But it's like, you don't hand somebody scissors blade first, you hand it to them, the other way around with the handle, right? So I
Right.
thought, I took that as like a subtle, like self-defense act, because you find this out later in the episode. I'm sure you'll talk about this when you go in depth on it, but he senses that something's off with this guy who wants to know really badly what he needs. It turns out
Yeah.
he might not have bargained for exactly what happened.
No, I was a Boy Scout once, and yes, they teach you always hand the sharp objects with blade in your hand. So
Right. Right.
um yeah, the one for me of these early ones that really lit my fire so far is the Lonely, which I actually did record a few mornings ago, which is the guy who's being kept in solitary confinement on an asteroid and is then gifted with a robot woman. So
Mm,
that was
I like that one. Yeah,
that was
I didn't watch that recently, but I do remember that one. The one I watched about the X2, that I forgot to mention, the part that I thought was interesting was when he's like, I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. And I'm like, oh, I gotta clip that and use that for the podcast outro.
Yeah, definitely. I think I don't think actually copyright could still be there for that. I don't know. CBS, it shouldn't matter, but
Even
um,
like little snippet clips like that,
no,
it can hit copyrights.
no, that's probably fine. No, I'm just thinking that usually something from 1960 you can like just use wholesale, but I
Oh
think the
yeah.
Twilight Zone still is a valued property by CBS or whatnot. So
Mm. Yeah, I was looking into that with books and such so I can figure out if there's any cool esoteric books I can just kind of not narrate whole cloth, but like take passages and narrate for the podcast and break down, what I think about, or maybe explain some things that, the novice might not understand because of context and other things that you run into when you read some of these more weird esoteric books. But yeah, the copyright is usually preventing you from doing anything fun like that. So there's only a few books that you can really dig into. I've found not a few, but it's limited.
yeah, I just started reading a book about the creation of or the boom of Los Angeles as a city, but I decided I had to start reading it. I was on the train and I wanted to read a new book, so I'm on my Kindle and like scrolling through, and the train bumps and my finger just hits that one and goes straight into the book. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm reading this one now.
Look at that. Wow. Okay.
So
Very cool.
and that's interesting because it starts off talking about the water rights, which I guess that's going to become an increasingly big thing for a lot of places. And
Well,
how
I,
Chinatown has sort of kind of that story, but the actual story is quite interesting. With William Mulholland, Mulholland Drive, I suppose, is named after him. Yeah, then it gets into D.W. Griffith basically starting Hollywood. So, it is an interesting book. So I guess it's good the train bumped my finger on it. I was looking for
yeah,
something more esoteric, to be honest, but I was like, oh, now I'm reading about the history of Los Angeles. Okay.
I'm sure that'll lead to a lot of esoteric things. I think that's something I learned really all too well. And people do ask me sometimes, like, oh, what book should I read? And I kind of just tell them, well, whatever speaks to you, because sometimes you find like really esoteric information in a seemingly, common or exoteric source, like that history of Los Angeles is going to connect a whole bunch of dots, especially when you get into what's gone on in Los Angeles since that's the founding of it. I'm sure you can find, and that's
Yeah,
just good. That's just good fun knowledge anyways. I mean, who doesn't like learning about other places?
exactly. And there's a few books that sounded completely nuts and whack, right? But I think my main meditational techniques still come from those books. So the books sounded nuts, but they'd get into these, why don't you try this, try this? And I try them. I was like, hey, this does work. So it's almost like they had, who knows, it could all be real, but, or they were just like basically concocting a wild story and putting in some really as a entertaining wrapping for some notable information. The point being, the
Possibly.
notable information is notable, so it's almost like the rest of the book doesn't matter. Though it was fun to read, so in multiple cases, I won't name names because I'm kind of talking smack about them, but to
Okay.
those writers, thank you, because it did still have some very necessary, helpful information. Um, we already mentioned your podcast a few times, but let me give you a chance for you to tell people how to get there.
Yeah. My family
Right.
thinks I'm crazy.com is where you can find the RSS feed and all the other links and the ways to support Linktree slash MFTIC. And we're on Instagram and Rockfin and all the other fun places. And if you want to get a spirit animal name like my friend Matt here, join the Patreon.
All right. As for this one, it's Time Enough podcast. We're on Facebook, Twitter. Our Patreon is under the podcasting umbrella of Podcastio Podcastius, where you can also hear podcasts about Pokemon and Monster Hunter. If that's your jam, you won't hear me on those because that's not quite my jam. But I do talk about sci-fi movies and Matt and Luke's Sci-Fi Sanctuary and Caught and educational films at Oral Hygiene. So come dig into that. But yeah, Mark, it's always good to talk to you about this stuff. Dreams in the title, so even if it wasn't the number one episode, it's definitely a good springboard for that sort of a conversation.
Right on. Very cool. Love it. Yeah, this was fun, man. Thanks for having me. I mean, this is season 1, so any other episodes that you want to have me on for, please, by all means, send me a list. I'd love to pick a few out that I could then watch, because I have the whole series on DVD, and it's always a good excuse to read, or I mean watch something new, and even read up on it too, because I find myself going and learning like little tidbits here and there about the actors and what else going on. So we'll see what happens next.
That's what I like, because it's an anthology, so
Mm,
it's like, because if you're doing a series, it kind of needs to be the same people every week, right? But if an
mm.
anthology show, I can bring in anyone. So I basically keep it to people I've talked to before for this one, just because I don't I want to get straight into some kind of a groove. But yeah.
Right on.
Okay, take it easy.